passion is hearing the voice of God. And why is that my passion? And we're going to look in John 10 today and find out the passion is all about this. Okay? And so I want to put this here already. This is, if this is my life, if I have just a little bit in there, I could probably survive. If I have this much in me, it'll be very effective. I'll have a good life. But God says,
just overflow.
Well, what's up, Ronnie?
overflowing, abundant life for everyone.
Oi.
Settle down, it's a possum on the fence.
Chase the possible one.
Abundant life. Abundant life is what he gives. And he talks about that in John 10, connected with his voice. Let's have a delve into this. Let's go into John 10. If you have your Bibles, we're opening at John 10. And the heading is Jesus is the Good Shepherd. And it says, verily, verily. Now, verily, verily, if they say it twice, that means it's really, really important. Okay? Verily, verily, I say unto you, he that entereth not by the door into the sheepfold, but climbeth up some other way, the same is a thief and a robber. But he that entereth in by the door is the shepherd of the sheep. To him the porter openeth, and the sheep hear his voice. And he calleth his own sheep by name, and leadeth them out. And when he putteth forth his own sheep, he goeth before them, and the sheep follow him, for they know his voice. And a stranger will they not follow, but will flee from him, for they know not the voice of strangers. The parable spoke Jesus unto them, but they understood not what things they were which he spake unto them. Then said Jesus unto them again, verily, verily, so again, very important, I say unto you, I am at the door of the sheep. All that ever came before me are thieves and robbers, but the sheep did not hear them. I am the door. By me, if any man enter in, he shall be saved, and shall go in and out, and find pasture. The thief cometh not, but for to steal, to kill, and to destroy. I am come that they might have life, and that they might have it more abundantly. So that would be life. This would be more abundantly. And it would just keep flowing and flowing and flowing. And so again, this is a story. Jesus loved to give these picture stories. And what is this story about? This story is about the shepherd and the sheep. Now, to understand this, you have to understand the times that they were living in. In Australia, when we want to herd a flock of sheep, we get behind them with our horses or our quad bikes and our dogs, and we round them up. Okay? We push them to where they have to go. Israel didn't do that. In biblical times, what they did is the shepherd would stand at the front and he would call the sheep and they would follow his voice.
Wow.
So there was no pushing at all. Okay? So he would just go out in front of his sheep, and they would all follow behind him wherever he walked. And he knew, and he called them by name. And in the evening, so that they'd have a rest, they'd have this sheep pen, if they could get to it, because they had to go and find pasture where they could. They would have the sheep pen, and they would have a number of flocks gathered together, and one person, the porter, would stand watch overnight while they slept. And that was to keep away wolves, bears, thieves, robbers, anything else that would try and get them at night. Okay? Then in the morning, the shepherd had to go and get his sheep out. And so he didn't do it like, oh, that tag's mine, and push them apart. He would call their names, and they would come. They would come, and they'd follow him where he needed to go. And he would bring them to a pasture. where they could feed for the day. And he would sit there and watch them all day to protect them. And so when you look at it like that, and then Jesus says he is the good shepherd. In Psalm 23 it says, God is, for the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He leads me beside quiet waters. Yeah. That's again about this shepherd, this picture of the shepherd. And that's the same type of idea that he was leading him by his voice. Okay? And what is this about? This is amazing when you start to see this abundant life connection to hearing the voice of God. Because when that sheep could go to green pasture, he'd have an abundant life. When the sheep was brought to water, he got the water he needed, he could have an abundant life. Everything was about having this life and being fruitful in their life. Having this abundant life. And it's such an amazing picture when you start to look at it. Because it says there, verily, verily, so then I say, so if you look at it again, it says, verily, verily, I say unto you, he that entereth not by the door into the sheepfold, that sheepfold was that pen at night. So there was a door in that sheepfold. So if a thief or a robber was coming, they'd try and get over the wall because the porter was standing at the door and he wouldn't let anybody else in. So the thieves and robbers who wanted to say, hey, I need some lamb chops tonight, they would try and get over the wall, okay? And he wouldn't let them in. So they try and get over. So he said, if he that entereth not by the sheepfold, but climbeth up some other way, the same is a thief and a robber. But he that entereth in by the door is a shepherd of the sheep. So Jesus came in the morning. If you look at that from the scriptural, the picture that's supposed to say Jesus is our shepherd, and we are his sheep, the people of his pasture. So we are his sheep. He is the shepherd in this picture. And we are following him because it says we know his voice. Because it says, but he that entereth in by the door is a shepherd of the sheep. So Jesus is the good shepherd. To him, the porter, that's the man at the door, openeth, and the sheep hear his voice. And if he calleth his own sheep by name. So it wasn't only his own sheep that was there were a number of group of sheep there. There were a number of flocks together that the porter was looking after. But Jesus called out his own and said, hey, come here. Come with me. And he called them by name. He knew them. Okay? He called his own sheep by name and leadeth them out. And when he putteth forth his own sheep, he goeth before them. And the sheep follow him. So once he's called them out of that pen, then he's saying, okay, now come, let's go. And off he goes. He walks. And they all follow him to where he wants to go. And all of them stay there. Now, how does that work? How can they know his voice? How can they know his voice? What does that mean? And I thought about it. And I thought, how does, okay, let's say somebody's just come to the Lord, they've become a little lamb in this flock. How are they going to hear the voice, learn to know the voice of Jesus the shepherd? How are they going to know? And I thought, well, if I was a little lamb, I would have a mum in the flock. And when the mum went, I'd follow the mum. Because that's what little sheep do. Huh? That's what little sheep do. They follow their little mum, their mums. So that's one way that we can learn the voice of God. Find somebody who's hearing the voice of God and latch onto them. And say, hey, how are you hearing God's voice? What are you hearing? How do you know it's God's voice? Can I trust that? How can I do this? Is this really God? How is he speaking to me? Because I want to hear his voice so that he can lead me to this abundant life. Because I can't get to that abundant life. I can be born again and survive. But I won't have this abundant life until I've got to hear his voice and follow it and go to the right places. Because that's when I'll thrive. That's when I'll have a great life. That's when I'll have a great life. But how do you get to that place? And I heard as well, Someone explained to me that those little lambs, what they would do is the shepherd would go in and he would hold the little lambs against him. And he would actually do it against their skin. Now that's something that I've been told is very important. I was told when I was feeding my children, when I had little babies, that I had to attach them to my skin. Because that would give me bonding to that baby.
Yeah.
So that he would put it under his shirt, the little lambs, and carry it close to his skin, on his skin, to get that lamb to get used to his voice. And then he would talk to that little lamb. Now I'm a mum of 4 children, 4 babies. I knew my babies' voices. I could go to a creche and pick up if my children were crying, if it was mine or not. Because I knew their voice. And they didn't even say a word yet. They only cried. But I knew their voice. Okay? I could tell of the cry that was there which one of my 4 it was. I could tell by the type of cry. Were they in danger? Were they hungry? Were they in need of a cuddle? What did they need? I could tell because I had got to know my child. I had got to spend time with them. I'd got to talk to them. I'd got to speak to them. I'd got to understand what their language was even without their language, without knowing the words that they were saying, because they didn't have words at that stage. Because the bond you build together. But that was not built because of a 5-minute meeting. That was built with hours and hours of spending time together. 24/7, spending time together so that we got to know each other. And that's the sort of knowing that God is talking about. He's not talking about just, oh, I know John. And I know John to a certain extent, but I don't really know John. Yeah? Yeah? There's a different, what does that, because it says here, we know his voice. What does this know mean? What does this know? This know is not just, I know John. No. Recognize and work with him and have a relationship with. And I believe it's having this relationship with. And that's what I was, in 1 Corinthians, it says that God has called us to have fellowship with Jesus Christ. That's his call on our life, to have this relationship. And that's why I'm so passionate about this. Because to me, I cannot have a relationship with any of you just by my preaching at you. You could read a book about me. You could see a picture of me. You could hear me preach, but you still won't know me. And I won't know you. There won't be a relationship yet. Someone else could write a big testimonial about me, but you still would not know me. You would not know me until we sit together and talk. If we don't sit together and talk heart to heart and get to know each other, then we don't have a relationship, or a very, very surface relationship, just a tiny little bit. It's definitely not abundant. But you've got to know his voice. So to me, it's one of the underpinning parts of your faith is learning to know God's voice and striving for that. Because then the next part is, even if we have a talk, if we're sitting there talking and I'm doing all the talking and John can't get a word in edgewise, then I'm not going to get to know him very well. If John does all the talking to me, then I won't get to know him very well. We have to actually sit and listen to each other and respond to what we're saying. Not just, I have a story for 5 minutes, then John has a story for 5 minutes, and then I can speak again for 5 minutes. That's not building a relationship. Building a relationship is getting together and hearing what they're saying, and then responding to that, and then But if it's only from one side, if only John is getting fed in that relationship, then it's not a real close relationship. It won't be a relationship that you think, wow, this is so good. It's got to be that he gets to know you and you get to know him. And that's the only way that it can be a strong relationship. Because you can hear what is being said, but not listen. And what do I mean by that story? When I was 18, we were in a group like this, and I was with my parents and my 7 brothers and sisters. Okay? And as an experiment, I thought, they don't actually listen to me. Okay? I can say things, but they're not listening to me. So I thought, well, let's do something totally shocking. I'm going to say something totally shocking that's absolutely untrue to see if they actually listen to me. And I said, I'm pregnant. Yeah? Not one person even reacted. Not one person reacted. An 18-year-old girl telling the family that she's pregnant, and not one person reacted. Okay? So you can talk, but is someone listening? You can talk, but is someone listening? And that's where, and that goes from both sides. It can be that you're talking and you're not, and God's not listening, or it can be that God's talking and you're not listening. Because if God is saying something to you, then and you don't listen to it, then why bother continuing the relationship? Don't you think? Yeah.
I like the saying, stop listening, pay attention.
Yeah, absolutely. Excellent. Because we've got to hear God's heart. See, because we've got to listen to not just the words, but what is meant there. How are we getting to know them? Okay? One of my boys, when he was 16, had a really hard time because he didn't think anybody was listening to him. Okay? And so he did some things, and so we said, okay. So what I did is I made a point of every 2 weeks I would go out and have a coffee just with him, because the other 3 were fairly loud and out there, and he was an introvert. And so he needed that extra time just with me to get that out. But I had to pull out what was in him because he couldn't even verbalize it. I had to actually try and work out what is his heart trying to say. Why is he upset at the moment? Why is he down? What is going on in his heart? And I'd have to say, is this your problem? No, that's not it. Is this your? That's it. And then we could work with it. But he was so locked up on the inside that he couldn't even tell me what the problem was. And so I had to listen with my heart and find out what was going on. So it's not just the words they say. It's this knowing is not just words. It's not just it's a responding with our whole being to God and God to us, and being in such a deep relationship that we are overflowing. Okay? That we have abundant life in us. Because that's what it says here. It says here, so the sheep, so it says it twice. It says, the sheep hear his voice, and he calleth his own sheep by name, and leadeth them out. And then in 4, he says it again. And when he putteth forth his own sheep, he goeth before them, and the sheep follow him, for they know his voice. They know his voice. So they know his voice. They know what his voice sounds like, and they know he's going to bring them to good things. And so they follow him. They're listening and obeying. They're paying attention to what is being said. And that's what God asks of us. And then it says here, and the stranger they will not follow, and they will flee from him, for they know not the voice of the stranger. They only know the voice of God. Therefore, when it's a voice that doesn't sound like that, those other babies in that creche, I didn't stand up and pay attention with them because they were not my children. I didn't have to worry about them. But as soon as it was mine, no matter if there was a wall between us, no matter if anything, I would pay attention and go and find them. And if it was danger, I'd be running. Because I knew what their cry of danger was. So, but if it wasn't their voice, then I didn't go. I didn't go. Okay? And if it wasn't my voice, they wouldn't go to me. Okay?
Mother love.
A stranger they will not follow. The parable spoke Jesus but they did not understand. They didn't understand these things. Because they had listened, they heard them, but they didn't listen and understand. We have to do that. But he says, then he said, Jesus again, verily, verily, I say unto you, I am the door of the sheep. He actually goes further and says, not only is the door there, and if you go through the door, but he says, I am the door. You go through me to get out and to get in. You go through me. Through me. I am the door of the sheep. All that ever came before me are thieves and robbers. Again, the thieves and robbers. They're out there to destroy your life. The thieves and the robbers. They're out there to destroy your life. But you have to not listen to them. But the sheep did not hear them. I am the door. By me, if any man enter, he shall be saved and shall go in and out and find pasture. That's not maybe, you shall go in. The thief cometh not, but to steal, to kill, and destroy. And I am come that they might have life, and they might have it abundantly.
Amen.
And I believe that abundant life comes from learning to hear that voice of God. Learning to hear that. Because then he'll say, hey, Amy, you should be over here. There's really, really good meeting here. Or this is what you should be reading today. And if I don't have that voice talking to me, how do I know? Yes, I might be born again, and I might have a little bit, and I can read the word, and that's great. But that's not the same as having a conversation. Because there's a lot of words in there, and I might find the bit I need for that day. But if I need the word that I need for that day, then I've got to be speaking to Jesus, and He's got to be speaking to me. So I really want to encourage you. It's my passion is to get this out there. We've got to get people hearing the voice of God for yourself. Then you don't have to rely on me to hear God's voice. You don't have to rely on the prophets to hear God's voice. You can hear God's voice for yourself. Yes, and that's just, yeah. Oh, let's just pray. Heavenly Father, we just thank you that you give us the ability to hear your voice. That you want to speak to us, Lord. That you're a God of relationship, Lord. That you call us into relationship. And you want to talk to us, and you want to speak to us, and you want to guide us and lead us and protect us, Lord. All of that is in your word, and I thank you for that, Lord. And I thank you that you give each of us. It doesn't say that they might have learned his voice. No, they knew his voice. All the sheep knew his voice because he spent time with them. He got them to know them, and they got to know him. And and Lord, that song tonight, you won't relent. You won't relent, Lord. You love your sheep so much, you won't relent until you have them in your hand, until they know your voice, until they know your voice and live this life abundantly, Lord. Thank you, Lord, that you won't relent. You won't relent because you love us so much that you want to give us this abundant life. And we just all we have to do is step into the tools that you have given us. We just ask you to help us to step into them and to really hear your voice and to break through anything that would stop your voice coming through, and any voices that are not from you, to break them and to bind them, Lord, so that they cannot speak to our spirit. Only your voice can speak to our spirit, and that we can hear your voice more clearly every day.